Initially, we were just neighbors who moved to a new neighborhood around the same time. The six of us were about the same age. My wife Claudine was 6 months pregnant when we moved in, and the couple across the street, Sal and Carrie, had a 2-year-old. Ginny and Jeff completed our sextet when they moved into the house next door with their 1-year-old daughter. As you can imagine, over the years, with all the moms turning out to have kids the same age, our wives became close friends. And yes, we guys were pretty close too. After 5 years of living in our little company, we had 7 kids. Through mentoring, PTA, school events, pool parties, and the like, we had almost become one big family. Our kids became friends, but even in 20 years, no romantic relationship of any kind was seen between them. So, at 49, I was the oldest in our company, and Carrie's 42 years made her the youngest. Everyone else's age was somewhere in the middle. Ginny and Jeff had 3 children, 2 of whom were in college, and their youngest son was in high school. Twin girls Carrie and Sala were in high school. Our oldest daughter, Chelsea, attended the University of Pennsylvania, and our son, Devin, joined the Navy after high school. So now we were empty nesters. All the wives eventually went back to work. When we moved into the neighborhood, all of our families were struggling financially, as were most young couples. Now, however, to one degree or another, we were all financially secure. My Claudine is a nurse practitioner and works for a large medical organization in our area. Carrie works as an accountant for a lumber supply company, and Ginny opened her own flower store after working at a small store whose owners decided to retire. Just a slice of middle America. Some are Democrat, some are Republican. All of us, at least nominally, were Christians, except for Sal and Carrie, who attended Catholic Mass regularly. All of us who were Christians went to services at Christmas, Easter, and special occasions. We were all sincere friends and enjoyed each other's company. Over the years, we learned to avoid talking about politics and religion, except for the most common topics. Not that we didn't have other friends and acquaintances both in the neighborhood and beyond, but we were a close-knit group. As time went on and our children grew up, the dependence on each other diminished, and we gradually moved on to other relationships. It was something that changed as the need to share the responsibility of being on the PTA, taking the kids to sports or school events, or needing to help each other with babysitting duties diminished. At some point, we realized we were drifting apart, and although I don't know who suggested it, we decided to get together on the first and third Friday of every month for poker night. We didn't always play poker, sometimes it was canasta. We tried playing bridge, but neither of us developed the enthusiasm to excel at it. Our wives, being the best organizers, kept changing the topics of the meetings. We had international dinners, chili cook-offs, trivia classes, classic movie nights, and even the old standby, charades. No one ever drank too much, but none of us were tea drinkers either, so those who hosted had an ample supply of wine, beer, and liquor. Although we were intimately acquainted with each other, there was little or no flirting between us. The occasional joke from time to time didn't count. Sex was not a topic of discussion unless it was a story about the latest escapade of a politician or celebrity. All of our wives were still attractive. A few extra pounds here and there, but they all kept themselves in shape and dressed in a way that emphasized their virtues, without provocation. Of course, I'm biased, but my wife was the hottest in our group. At 163 centimeters tall, 52 pounds, with short brown hair, green eyes, and a size 3, she was the girl next door. We had been married for almost 26 years, and aside from great sex at least twice a week, I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of serious fights we'd had over the years. No, our sex life hadn't diminished. Everything was cool until a month ago when I visited a client for a quarterly audit. I'm a private practice accountant specializing in working with small to mid-sized corporate clients. Most of my clients have revenues of less than 10 million gross, and I visit their offices every 3 months to review their general ledgers, prepare state and federal tax forms, and to verify employee insurance. I was in the office of Max Tolson, one of my oldest clients, whom I considered a friend. He and his late wife, Sylvia, had been to our house many times for parties, and we had been to his. Max was out of the office when I arrived at his place of business, and his accountant, Louise, set me up in the conference room so I could start my work. Max showed up around 1 o'clock, and, absorbed in his work, I barely noticed him sitting across from me at the large conference table. Max is a fat, outgoing man in his 60s, and I've always enjoyed his company. He has an irreverent attitude toward many things, and especially politicians, so our conversations usually included contempt for virtually all elected officials, local, state, and federal. When I realized it was him sitting across from me, I looked up and smiled in greeting. When he spoke, he seemed sad and hesitant. "Charlie, I'm so sorry about you and Claudine. I thought you guys were solid as a rock." I looked at him questioningly. My curiosity was piqued, but I was sure that everything he thought he knew was a mistake. "So what did you hear?" I asked with a smirk. He looked confused as he continued. "Damn, did I just make a gaffe?" It was a rhetorical question, but I answered, "Max, what did you hear? What made you think my family wasn't solid?" From the look on his face, it seemed that if he had an ejector switch, he would have flown through the ceiling and out through the roof. "Max," I continued patiently, "we've been friends for years. What exactly did you hear, and who did you hear it from?" Finally, he took a deep breath and asked, "Are you and Claudine all right? Are you two together? Not getting a divorce or anything?" I just shook my head. "God damn it," he shrieked, me and my big fucking mouth. "Look, Charlie, forget I said anything. I'm an asshole, and I probably got my names mixed up. I'm getting old, you know. Sometimes I walk into a room and I forget why the hell I walked in there. I know it's to get something if I remember what it is." Max's repertoire of expressions goes back to when he was just starting his business and getting his hands dirty on a regular basis, but I knew he was just stalling. Max still hadn't convinced me because he wasn't stupid or oblivious. "Come on, Max, cut the crap," I said a little more forcefully than I intended. My initial amazement at his question turned into something close to suspicion. "All right, okay. Anyway, it probably doesn't mean anything," he said dismissively, waving his hand. In fact, I hadn't heard anything. Before I could object to what was another stalling tactic, he continued. "I was having some problems with high blood pressure, and my doctor changed my prescription and made me see him twice a week so he could control my blood pressure. He's one of those doctors who works in the same office as your wife. Almost a month ago was just such a visit day. I was waiting at the front desk when the doctor walked past me. 'Son of a bitch,' he said, not addressing anyone and looking away. Anyway, the girl at the desk eventually called my name and told me to go to room D Mall, that the doc would be here in a minute. I'm a little hard of hearing, but too proud to admit it, but I was pretty sure she said D. All the doors were closed, so when I got to the door labeled D, I slowly opened it to peek inside before going in. I didn't want to walk in on some poor bastard who had his gloved finger shoved up his ass. Anyway, he sighed uncomplainingly, that's when I saw them. I saw Claudine and some guy in the green pajamas that all the patients wear in hospitals and doctors' offices these days. I like it when you know right away who's who. Doctors wear a tie with a 3/4 length white coat, and they have a stethoscope around their neck. Nurses have starched white uniforms with a nursing school cap. The nursing assistants wear pajamas, and the janitors look like janitors. With today's political correctness, it's better to know who's probing your intimate places. Max stalled again, and I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't want to continue. My heart was pounding frantically, but I said as calmly as I could, "Max, it sounds like what you saw is not what I want to hear, but I need to hear it. You've opened a can of worms, and there's no way to drive the genie back into the bottle." Trying to squeeze some levity out of myself, which I certainly didn't have, I added, "Max, I know this is embarrassing, but I promise not to shoot the messenger." "Ah, for crying out loud," he proclaimed. They didn't hear me click the door shut, and I can tell you, Charlie, I almost shit my pants. Apparently, Max thought he had fulfilled his obligation of full disclosure, but there was no way I was going to settle for him glossing over something as serious as this, so I persisted. "Max, did you see them kissing? Did she smack him on the lips? Did they put their arms around each other? Did they kiss with their tongues? Were their bodies interlocked with each other? What did it look like? Give me something, Max." "Damn it," he exclaimed. Yes, they were kissing, and they were pretty close to each other. and he slipped his hand under her blouse, whatever it was called. It all looked like it was more than just a kiss on the lips. As far as I could tell, it was a young guy with curly brown hair, early 30s or so. I didn't get a close look at him. Closing the door behind me, I went back to the front desk, where I was told it was a B room, not the D room I was supposed to be in. When my doctor came in, my fucking blood pressure was 240 over 122. He even wanted to put me in the fucking hospital, God forbid. Later, when I thought about what I had seen, I thought you guys must be splitting up, which is why I opened my big mouth. I have no idea how long I sat there with my head down when I felt Max standing behind me and massaging my shoulders with his hands. He leaned over and said in a soft voice, "Charlie, I want to tell you something I've never told other people, something that makes me very ashamed. I loved my Sylvia with all my heart and soul. When she died, I wanted to die to be with her too. Nevertheless, we are all human and we all make mistakes. About 20 years ago, I was in Congress. My business was starting to pick up and I had money in my pocket. I felt like I was on top of the world. I was young. The booze and hormones were pouring in, and I invited the woman I met there into my room and literally kicked the shit out of her. We spent the whole night together. She was married, attending another Congress, and if my life depended on it, I couldn't tell you her name or even what she looked like. All I remember is waking up alone with a splitting headache and the memory of what I had done. Me, big tough Max, crying into my pillow at my own betrayal. If there is a God and a heaven, I know Sylvia will know what I did. I just pray that she forgives me and we can be together again. Listen, Charlie, what I saw may have been nothing more than a one-time flirtation, a moment of human weakness. Please think about that before you do anything." Tears were streaming from my eyes now, which I tried unsuccessfully to hide, and I reached over my shoulder, patted Max's arm, and said in a shaky voice, "I don't think I can stay here and keep working. My head is occupied with something else entirely now." In a booming voice, more like the Max I'd known all these years, he roared, "To hell with taxes! To hell with the corrupt, blood-sucking government! Get out of here! You'll do it another time!" I thought long and hard about what Max had said about human frailty, and while kissing and groping alone may not be an impediment to our marriage, I believed the old adage, there is no smoke without fire. After leaving Max and knowing that Claudine was at work, I headed straight home. Deciding to play detective, I looked in the drawers for underwear I hadn't seen before. I even checked the laundry basket for panties that might have any traces on them. After half an hour of fruitless digging, I gave up. It was clear that if there was any evidence, it would be in her purse or on her phone. My wife works from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. When she got home, she found me in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on a meal I had prepared. There was an open bottle of Chardonnay on the table. After kissing me on the lips, she poured her own wine. Our conversation over dinner was a little slurred because I couldn't get the image of what Max had described out of my head. After dinner, we watched TV, mostly in silence. Even Claudine noticed the change in my behavior. She didn't say anything. When we finally went to bed, Claudine disappeared into her dressing room and came out wearing my favorite purple teddy bear and smelling of my favorite perfume. She slipped into bed next to me. She declared, "Looks like my little friend doesn't want to play. I'll have to fix that." I was probably just being paranoid, but her term, little friend, was definitely not inspiring to me. That night, my wife was in rare form. My wife never talks during sex. I don't mean she doesn't make noise. It's just that Claudine isn't the kind of woman who expresses her finishes with words. She never says something like, "Take me harder," or any other words to that effect. Her guttural moans and grunts are a clear indicator of when she is climaxing. She fell asleep quickly, and Max's revelations kept me awake for a long time. I was my own boss, so I decided to go to the office a little later the next morning. Claudine kissed me passionately before jumping in the shower to get ready for her shift. She went into the bathroom naked, and I couldn't help but admire her beautiful ass. I prayed she didn't share it with anyone else. I was in a more relaxed mood when I went downstairs to put the coffee on. No doubt the previous night of passion had helped dispel my paranoia a bit. Maybe it was just a one-off moment of weakness, I thought. After all, it had been almost a month ago when Max had been at her office, and how could a woman who had professed to love me and displayed such unbridled passion just a few hours ago have a lover on the side? Besides, I pondered, when does she ever have time for a lover? Okay, a kiss and a quick grope in an empty exam room, but certainly not full-on sex in a busy medical office. She never worked late, no girls' night out, no bowling. Nothing. All of this may have to do with jumping to conclusions from nothing. I tried to be optimistic, but I realized that even a simple kiss and letting another man fondle her breasts was something. At this last thought of mine, Claudine walked into the kitchen dressed in her scrubs, and I saw how easily accessible her breasts were in those loose clothes. If something was going on, I should have known. If something was going on but it was over, well, I guess I would never know. Nevertheless, later that morning I chose a detective agency from the Yellow Pages that was close to my office and made an appointment for the same day. On the door was written, A. Mellon Detective Agency. As I entered the office, I was surprised to see an attractive woman in her 50s. She had gray hair, a beautiful figure, and unusually large breasts that protruded noticeably even from under her jacket. After I introduced myself, she extended her hand and said, "Hi, my name is Ann Mellon." I was immediately embarrassed as an involuntary laugh escaped from my throat. I started to apologize, but she interrupted me by saying in a submissive tone, Yeah, don't worry. I've been getting ridicule since I was 16. I learned that she was a retired NYPD detective and possessed the same sarcastic wit and cynical demeanor often displayed on television cop shows. After I explained why I had come to see her and what I needed to know, she asked me all the pertinent questions: age, children, sex life, occupations, etc. And then asked me a question I wasn't prepared for, and which frankly angered me. "Mr. Manza, have you ever cheated on your wife?" She saw the irritation on my face, and when I firmly replied, "Never," she went on to say that she herself had experienced such a thing several times, under different spouses. "Mr. Manza." "Charlie," I interrupted. "Charlie," she continued, "the reason I had to ask that question is because sometimes a spouse cheats to avenge their partner's real or imagined cheating. Right now, you have an unsubstantiated claim that a month ago someone allegedly saw your wife being kissed and touched. On top of that, you told me that she has no way of having illicit affairs and that your sex life at home is good and unchanged. So in police speak, I will tell you. However, if you are willing to spend the money to put your mind at rest, I am certainly willing to accept it." I signed the contract and paid her a monetary fee. At home, everything was normal. Claudine was as affectionate and cheerful as ever, and I was beginning to believe that maybe Max was wrong. By the following Monday, I hadn't heard from Anne. Realizing that I had probably accrued some hefty billable hours at work, I decided that I would call her before the end of the day and stop investigating. Just after lunch, Anne herself called me, and in her usual cryptic tone said, "Charlie, I'm pretty sure I have everything I need. Would you mind showing up at my office before 5 o'clock? I have a date tonight and I don't want to rush to get ready for it." I got to her office at 4:30 p.m. and was, to say the least, a little wary, since she hadn't hinted anything over the phone about the results of her investigation. When I arrived, she gestured for me to sit next to her desk, and while she wasn't warm and fuzzy, I noticed a change in her demeanor, something that made me a little irritable. Before I could ask anything, she handed me a manila envelope across the table and said in a softer voice, "You know, Charlie, the best part of this sucky job is when I can tell my spouse that he got it all wrong, and there's no evidence of infidelity." My sigh of relief was suppressed when she continued, "Unfortunately, this isn't one of those times. It's one where I hate my job." My heart was racing, and I had to force myself to breathe. As for any connection to a coworker, I can't say definitively since I couldn't walk around the medical office building. However, twice last week, first on Monday, she left work around 1 p.m., presumably for lunch, drove 2 blocks to an apartment complex, and went into a studio apartment. She was there for just under an hour, and no one came out after her, so I waited for her to leave, and 10 minutes later a man came out of the same apartment, got in his car, and drove off. It didn't seem to be the guy your friend described, as he was in his early 40s and had gray hair. On Tuesday and Wednesday, she went to lunch with a coworker, but on Thursday she followed the same routine as Monday. Again, she stayed at the apartment for about an hour, but this time they left together, and before she got in the car, they exchanged a more than casual kiss. The apartment was on the first floor, and unlike last time, there was a large enough opening in the curtains for me to take some photos while they were inside. All the pertinent data is in the report, including time-stamped photos of them in the apartment, her coming and going, their kisses, and his personal information that I got from his license plate and cross-checking the apartment's rental information. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "Charlie, I'm going to give some unsolicited but good advice. Don't open the envelope. Just give it to your attorney, if divorce is the path you intend to take." After a moment's silence, she continued, "But I know you won't take my advice. I myself didn't listen when it happened to me. There's a masochistic streak in all of us that only makes the pain worse. I'm telling you a cliché of clichés, but it's true. Sometimes good people do bad things, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad people. Do yourself a favor. Make it as painless as possible for yourself and your family. Revenge eats away at the soul." She came out from behind the desk as I stood up, trying to hold back tears, kissed my cheek, and, no longer looking like a cop, said, "Please don't do anything stupid, Charlie. I know you're in pain. I've been in that situation too, but life doesn't stand still and time heals all wounds." I went back to my office, and before I opened the envelope, I wrote to Claudine, "I'm having problems at work with the audit that is due tomorrow. I'm going to be late. Don't wait up." The last words stuck in my throat, but their absence would have been quite obvious. Love, Charlie. I guess we all have masochistic tendencies, because I did the exact opposite of what my detective recommended. I opened the envelope. The report was pretty detailed, with names, dates, length of stay, and a very general description of what was on the CD. Anne called it intimate sexual contact. Reluctantly and with trembling fingers, I inserted the CD into the player, and after about 10 minutes of watching all the footage, I did the next thing Anne had warned me about. I began to plan my revenge. When I got home and walked into our bedroom, Claudine was asleep, watching the rise and fall of her breasts, her brown hair framing her face on the pillow, and the seemingly peaceful innocence of her sleep. I wondered what had gone wrong. For a moment, I thought maybe I should talk to her. If we went to a counselor, maybe we could save the marriage. But then I remembered the tape I'd seen just an hour ago. How long, I asked myself, has this been going on? How many others has she betrayed me with? Truth be told, I didn't want to know. The answers could only serve to torment my already broken heart more. When I woke up in the morning after a restless night's sleep, Claudine wasn't in bed. I could smell the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting up the stairs from the kitchen. The smell used to bring me comfort and a sense of security, but now it twisted my stomach. Claudine was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee and finishing her yogurt when she saw me enter the kitchen. She looked at me with concern and asked, "Are you all right, baby? Have you been tossing and turning all night?" "Yes," I replied, just an upset stomach. "I'm fine now." She was relieved, but I didn't know if it was because I felt better or because she was happy that my anxiety wasn't due to my suspicions of her cheating. Whatever the case, she said cheerfully, "Don't forget that this Friday is our poker night. The girls and I thought it would be a pursuit race. What do you think?" At this point, a vague plan popped into my head, and I said, "I have a better idea. I want to make an evening of it, changing things up a bit." "Okay," she said with a smirk, "as long as it doesn't involve us girls being topless." "Don't worry, honey," I said sarcastically. "I wouldn't want my wife flaunting her breasts to anyone, not even our friends." With the same sarcasm, she replied, "Really? I think I've seen you checking out Jeannie's cleavage more than once." Forcing myself to laugh, I said, "Well, there's a big difference between looking and touching." Apparently, my comment, again, went over her head because she put her cup in the sink and kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. My plan was well underway. I spent a few hours that day getting what I needed and a couple hours the next day to gather the necessary data and materials needed to make my plan work. I actually came up with a great concept, and if it hadn't involved such dire consequences, I probably could have sold it. I managed to avoid having sex with my wife on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, but on Thursday, when we went to bed, Claudine wouldn't take my no for an answer. She was dressed only in panties and an old t-shirt and looked very sexy. From the moment we first began our sexual intimacy, Claudine had been exceptional at sex. Despite my reluctance, she quickly accomplished her goal. Friday, after our friends arrived, we settled in the living room, enjoying cocktails and some pre-packaged appetizers I'd bought at the supermarket. Conversation was light, mostly about our kids, work, neighborhood activities, and the like. Ginny looked sexy. Showing off her cleavage, she turned to me. "So, Charlie, I hear you've come up with a new game for us tonight. Are we girls going to see something new?" Charlie: "Exactly," I replied. "I think it's a very interesting game, and I've spent quite a bit of time organizing it. We're going to go to the dining room. There are nameplates hanging on each seat. There is also paper and pens lying around for each player. Since I made up the game and know the answers, I will be the moderator and timekeeper. On the plates are numbers from 1 to 10, and each number has 4 subsections, A, B, C, and D. I will take turns passing 10 pictures one at a time, and each player will have 30 seconds to write down their answers. Then you have to pass the picture to the person sitting to their right. The pictures are of couples, some famous, some not so famous. Each question is worth 4 points. So, let's say the picture is of Laurel and Hardy. The player gets all 4 points if he knows both the first and last name of each of them. For example, if that person only knows the last names, he gets 2 points. If he knows Stan Laurel but doesn't remember that Hardy's name is Oliver, he gets 3 points. In other words, there is 1/2 point for each name, first and last. If Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall were in the picture, but the player could only remember Humphrey Bogart and not his movie partner, he would only get 1 point for the entire round. Any questions? Oh, and all the pictures have a theme associated with them. Anyone can shout out what they think the theme is at any time. However, if you are wrong, you lose a point for each incorrect guess. If you are right, however, 2 points will be added to your final score. I've arranged the seats so that Claudia sits at the head of the table. I'm to her right. To my right sat Jeff, and next to him on the same side of the table sat his wife, Ginny. Across from Ginny was Carrie's seat. To her right sat her husband, Sal, and to his right, closing the circle, sat Claudine. All the games we had played so far were becoming redundant, and everyone seemed enthusiastic that this could be something uniquely challenging. "Remember," I cautioned, "don't let your neighbor see the picture, as it will give him the advantage of extra time." The game began, and I handed the first picture to Jeff face down and hit the stopwatch. I started with what I thought were the easiest of them all, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. I could see Jeff smiling as he wrote down his answers within 10 seconds. After I called time, he slid the picture face down to Carrie, who seemed less confident than her husband. She wrote something down, and after a 5-second hesitation, looked a little frustrated as she flipped the photo over and slid it further down. When the picture finally reached Claudine, she seemed pleased and quickly wrote down her answers. The next picture was with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver. Everyone seemed confident in their answers. The third picture was of Al Gore and Tipper Gore, and it took the players a little longer as it was probably a little harder to remember Mrs. Gore's name. It was followed by a picture of Jerry Lewis and Patty Lewis. They were married for 38 years, but even I would have no idea of her name if I hadn't found it on the internet. After that, it was Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon, which everyone seemed to like. The next shot was a tough one, Reba McEntire and Narvel Blackstock. There were a lot of good-natured complaints like, "Come on, no fair. Who the hell would recognize them?" Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston brought smiles to everyone's faces. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes elicited similar reactions. At this point, Jeff, who seemed the most confident, stated, "I want to try a theme." "Sorry, Jeff," I said, doing my best imitation of the foghorn used on old game shows. The next pictures showed Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe, as well as Mickey Hargitay and Jane Mansfield. Everyone leaned back in their chair, and there were many comments about how well I had done in making the game. "We're not done yet," I proclaimed. "I have a bonus picture, and there will be a 3-point bonus for each correct answer, but you only have 5 seconds. Everyone seemed excited about scoring more points, but I took my time showing the picture to Jeff, who had a confident smile on his face. When he turned it over, his smile was gone, and he didn't reach for the pen. He just sat there, looking at the picture with a blank expression on his face. Sal laughed and said, "Wow, that must be hard." I hit the stopwatch and said in a commanding voice, "Time's up, Jeff. Pass the picture to Ginny." Without turning it face down, he held out the picture to Ginny, who looked up at him with a triumphant smile because he couldn't identify the people in the picture. When she finally looked down and saw a selection of 4 pictures on a 20x25 centimeter sheet, she, aghast, dropped the picture and covered her mouth with her hand. One frame showed Claudine standing on all fours in bed and being had from behind. Another showed her in the 69 position. The next one showed Claudine with her legs spread and a man's head. The last shot showed her kneeling on the floor. The man's recognizable face was clearly visible in all but one of the photos where he was buried between my wife's legs. "Time, Jeannie, to give Carrie a chance," I said cheerfully. She looked at me sadly, but didn't move to hand over the photo. Carrie laughed and said, "Come on, give the rest of us a chance." She reached out and slid the picture towards me. Carrie looked at the images blankly and seemingly without emotion, but finally reached to the middle of the table and picked up a glass bowl of onion dip and shouted, "You fucking bastard!" and threw the bowl at Sal's face. Sal was knocked off his chair and tried to wipe away the onion sauce and blood that splattered from his nose, eyes, and face. Jeff and Ginny watched stoically as the scene unfolded and Claudine stood stunned. Sal tried to stand up and screamed, "What the fuck?" Carrie grabbed the pictures from the table that Claudine was looking at in shock and shoved them in her husband's face and growled, "That's what the fuck, you slimy piece of shit!" With those words, she kicked him right in the balls. As Sal curled up in a fetal position, Carrie walked around the table, walked over to Claudine, who was hugging herself and sobbing quietly, and punched her in the face so hard that my wife staggered backwards and broke a porcelain vase. Carrie turned and, looking contemptuously at her moaning husband, hissed, "Don't even think about coming home, you unfaithful bastard. Not tonight, not ever." Then she left the room. Except for Claudine's hoarse sobs, there was dead silence in the room until I muttered, "By the way, tonight's topic was divorced couples."